Often religion is seen as part of the problem, and we cannot deny that it is part of the problem, but then it must also be part of the solution.
People want to live together, regardless of their faith, regardless of their ethnic background.
We find out that there is more that we have in common.
There's this really strong history of acceptance and regard and respect for one another.
We don't need to reinvent the wheel, we just need to connect those groups together and that they can learn from each other's experiences.
In the local communities, people still live, would love to live together. Our role is to facilitate that, to support them either technically or financially so that they realize they have the potential.
I launched a Ramadan festival to bring Muslims closer to non-Muslims. We try to stimulate Muslim families not only to share with the closest friends, is to share with the whole country.
We had Christians, Yazidis, Muslims, Shia and Sunni, and Sabi and Mandaean, religious leaders and representatives just walking in silence in one of the main roads in Baghdad. People were stunned, they hadn't seen something like this.
This is a welcome church. So it's not just about refugees and it's not just about the poor, it's about people who are on the edge in all kinds of ways. This is a safe space for them.
Our challenges are also shared somewhere else.
They brought together people from all over the world, really amazing people.
All people, regardless of their age and background, passionate about making their societies better and building trust between societies.
The problem we are experiencing in one country could also be the same elsewhere.
We had participants, from Sri Lanka to America and different European countries and of course different Middle Eastern countries.
We got to know one another as people.
It opens doors to the world. It opens doors to other activists.
And we had very young activists and we had very old practitioners sitting around the same table discussing the same issues.
So I took some of interesting ideas from the exchange.
Being inspired and do something with it and take action.
It really did give me a boost and an energy.
You share, you care.
The more you share, the more you get.
Speed, please. Thank you. Good morning once again, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So the video gives us a foretaste of the conversation we're going to have today. As some of them said, we're all here sitting around the same table talking about religion and society. Religion and society, religion in society, religion and foreign policy. These are not topics that many of us talk about, discuss every day. But in this challenging world, in this world of division where there's us and them, often exacerbated by the media, social media, but also the mainstream media, where it's about divisions, it's important sometimes, it's important always to think about the common ground, the public good, what we can all do together. And that is what this conference is about, and that's what the global exchange on religion and society is about. I'm Shada Islam. I'm Director for Europe and Geopolitics at Friends of Europe and working on these issues as well. So that's why I'm really privileged and honored to be here to moderate this morning's discussions. Now the hashtag, and I do encourage all of you to tweet. This first hour with this morning is also web streamed, so people are listening to us and watching us outside. Welcome to you as well. It's hashtag religion in society, so please do tweet. What's this morning going to look like? First of all, we're really delighted and honored to have with us Federica Mogherini. Ms. Mogherini, welcome. You are, of course, the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, but also Vice President of the European Commission. We're going to kick off with a keynote address by yourself, Federica, and then we're going to have a panel discussion with two people who have actually played a very important role in crafting this religion and society global exchange. That's Dr. Swati Chakraborty. She's Professor of Women's Studies and Human Rights at Schoolguru Eduserve in India, and Dr. Peter Mandaville, Professor of International Affairs at the George Mason University and a former official of the US State Department. Both have been very closely associated with designing this agenda. I will have a conversation with them, and then if there is time, I will open the floor to some questions from yourself. Ms. Mogherini, you have to leave at 10:30, so we have to finish by then. And then we have another packed agenda. We have two panels, one on religion and foreign policy. There's a coffee break, and there's a panel on best practices in religion and society and how we can learn from each other. So without further ado, Ms. Mogherini, please. Your floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you. Is it off? No? Yes? You hear me? You hear me anyway, even if it's off?
It's going to be on. Try again.
It is on? It is on? You hear me? Yes, now yes. Good. Welcome, everybody, and thank you very much for being here. For some of you, I have to say thank you for being here again, because with some of you we met a few months ago, and I know that you've been helping us in this last years. I'll say something about the process that has led us here. And with many of you, we have worked hand in hand to shape this new initiative, this project that I'm proud we can launch today together. There is a reason why we wanted to have you here today with us. And if you look around you, and if I look at you from this podium, you will see one thing that strikes the most, and that is an incredibly diverse group of people. And diversity being in our societies, I think it is quite correct whenever we manage to represent diversity also in shaping and launching an initiative like this. Some of you work with NGOs, some are from government, some other represent religious communities and institutions. You've come from near, and some of you come from very far away, and all continents are represented in this room. Most of you have an impressive and long-standing experience in this field. Some are not used probably to big international conferences like this might be, or to engaging with governments or with institutions. And I want to thank you all for coming, and most of all for trusting us and engaging with us in this common work, in this common challenge we have embarked upon. Among you there are secular and religious people, representatives of great organizations and of very small, even tiny NGOs, but all of you have something in common. You are all showing with your daily work, with your daily lives, that coexistence is possible and is what you want and what you live. You are all working to make our societies more inclusive and more just for all. You heard it in the video, religion has to be part of the solution. But most importantly, I believe in so many places around the world, religion is already part of the solution. In all continents, there are people of faith who have chosen the path of respect and coexistence, not in spite of their faith, but because of their faith. Likewise, in all continents, there are secular people who recognize and understand the need to engage with all dimensions of society, none excluded, and that includes religion, in the same spirit of respect and as part of one human family. Also here, in the video, we heard wise words. We need to connect as human beings, first and foremost. There is such immense human capital in all our societies. There are so many good stories that too often go unheard, because clearly media, social media, but also mainstream media, tend to focus on the bad news. What makes the headlines is when something goes wrong. But the good stories, the good news, the good people that around the world are working on a daily basis to improve things hardly make the news, hardly make their voices heard. And this is the silent majority. This is the silent majority you just heard about. The reason why we asked you to join us today and in the previous months and in the coming months and years is that we want to amplify these voices. We want to amplify these good stories. You hold the key to making your societies, our societies, a better place, and you're doing this already. In some of your countries, there is a history of respect and coexistence that you are preserving and rediscovering, nourishing somehow. In other cases, you are exploring innovative ways of coming together and bridging all sorts of divides. And it is true, we're living times where divides seem to grow and become even more relevant in our societies. Our job as European institutions is not to teach you or show you how to do what you're already doing so amazingly, but we can invest in people like you. We can help you make your voices heard and show the way to others who share your passion, your ideas, your values, your experiences. Let me tell you something about the path that has led us to this conference today and to the launch of this program, most importantly, because this is not just a conference, this is the beginning of a journey we're doing together. For me, personally, it was an idea I had some 3 years ago. I was in Indonesia, I was in Jakarta, and I had a meeting with civil society and religious communities working to preserve their own society as an inclusive and respectful place for everyone, no matter what religious or ethnic background they had. And I realized at that moment that there was so much to learn from those people, and that was so much that could have been shared with not only people working in institutions like I was, and I am still for a few months, but most importantly, with people working on the same kind of challenges across the world. And I am glad that some of them are here with us today, some of the very same people that I met those 3 years ago in Indonesia. It took us a bit of time to work on the project, but finally we got it. Also because it was a completely innovative field of action, because normally you deal with religion in societies on the domestic side of policies. But mixing and matching that with our foreign policy has been, let's say, opening new doors and new avenues and new paths for our institutions as well. So in a difficult world like ours, I believe, and I realized that perfectly well those 3 years ago, that we have the responsibility to invest and preserve these positive experiences, and when possible, to help these seeds grow into something bigger, to allow others to have access to this wisdom and to these experiences. The idea was so never to ask you to do something for us. On the contrary, for once, we've asked you what we could do for you, what we could do to empower you even more. This is why we started working with the Lokahi Foundation, who have helped us go from theory to practice, also with the financial support of our foreign policy instrument. And I would like to thank the team for their amazing work. You've put together an incredible group of people from the most diverse backgrounds who have helped us shape this new initiative, that being innovative was somehow experimenting new forms of working, already in the making of the project. After over 2 years of work, we've come up with something that we as the European Union have never done before. This is the Global Exchange on Religion in Society. It's a sort of Erasmus for civil society actors, civil society activists who are working on faith and social inclusion. People like you will have the chance to visit a relevant country for a short period of time, learn from the reality on the ground, first and foremost, and learn also from peers coming to join you from all around the world. We've chosen to set this up as a new exchange for 2 reasons. First of all, we want to connect and empower people like you. We want to connect you because, as I heard from some of you a few months ago, you don't just share the same challenges in different countries, but sometimes you share the same approach to solutions to those challenges. And it is so important to share ideas on how to solve issues that you see emerging in your societies. because we know that all countries are different, but there is so much that we all have in common as human beings. So listening to each other's stories, understanding realities that might look far away, can also give us ideas on what we could do on the ground in our own countries, all around the world. And we want to connect the positive experiences inside Europe with those all around the world, knowing that all of you, all of us, have something to teach and something to learn. And as some say in the video, the more you share, the more you get. And this is the principle at the basis of this program. Coming together make you stronger, and this is the sense of what we are embarking on. And we also want to empower you, so connecting and empowering in very practical ways. Also this we discussed together with a group of you in June. Give you practical training, specific trainings, new skills, potentially some assistance when you will go back to your countries and your daily work, ways in which we can support the work after the exchange has finished. And then the exchange is never finished, because as Erasmus program teaches us, an exchange lasts forever, because the connections you make during that time creates connections that last over decades and sometimes over your entire life. So connect and empower. But the idea of such a global exchange is also something that touches, I would say, deeper issues, deeper elements of the times we're living and the policies we want to put in place. Because we live in a moment in our history, in the history of the world, when coexistence and respect cannot be taken for granted. Some say it would not be taken for granted any longer. Actually, I think that if we look back in times, we can hardly remember a time when coexistence was to be given for granted. So I don't think we have a golden age to go back to, but we have to find ways in which we can invest in coexistence and respect. I don't like too much the word tolerance. That implies a negative sense, but I think that respect is the key to recognizing differences without being afraid of them, and being open to accepting the other as he or she is. So how do we build coexistence and respect in the world of today? Certain societies are becoming more diverse than they have ever been, and some people, some of them rightly so, don't have the instruments to deal with that, don't know how to cope with that. And that becomes then a problem in society, sometimes even a political problem. Other societies with a longer history of diversity and coexistence are today experiencing new tensions, new challenges, new divides. So also this, how can religion in society help bridging diversity? How can it help building coexistence? It feels like we all need to learn how to live together, or relearn how to live together, accepting that somehow we are all different and all equal, and respecting each other profoundly. And there is no better way than learning from one another, I believe, and from those of us who have a good story to tell in this respect. So focusing on the good stories. Obviously, we know very well, focusing on the good stories is not a way of denying that there are also problems and tensions. And there are instruments we have put in place, others have put in place, others will put in place to deal with the tensions and the problems. But for once, let's try to focus on the positive that is already there, because sometimes this is also a way to prevent or to cope with the negative trends that we see emerging or consolidating in society across the world. So sometimes, not only in this field, but also in foreign policy proper, I feel that we only focus on problems and not so much on the people that have managed already or managing to already to solve the problems. Maybe on a little scale, but there is, I think, a powerful hope there that can be a source of inspiration. I believe we should invest more on the good stories, on the many people who are making their societies a better place, like people that are present in this room, like people that will benefit from this exchange on religion in society. So with this new initiative, we want to invest in the good stories. We want to acknowledge the positive role that religion is already playing in some parts of the world, of our societies. We want to recognize the solutions that are coming from the grassroots and from the core of our communities. So with the Global Exchange on Religion in Society, we focus on the peace builders and on the change makers, on the bridge builders, from small communities to the world. We focus on you. So thank you for joining us in this journey. I am extremely excited. We're launching this today, and I'm looking forward very much to the program to be started and also to our discussion this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Federica Mogherini, for making some very, very important points about the global exchange, but also of how you see the world as inclusive and with coexistence at its center. So we're going to have a conversation now with you. I'm going to ask Peter Mandaville and Swati Chakraborty to please join me here. Please come up. There are seats reserved for you and for me. Peter, you're here, and Swati, you're there. Okay, so as I said, Ms. Mogherini, you've really set the agenda. You've talked about many things that I think all of us here are very, very conscious of, very aware of, but we don't actually articulate it so much in our everyday lives. You've talked about coexistence, living together. You've talked about the good stories that go unheard and that this exchange program will hopefully amplify. And you've talked about the need to empower people, the change makers. And you've talked about Indonesia and that your journey actually began there. I have to say, for me as well, Indonesia has a very important place in my heart, and I have learned a lot from there as well. So thank you very much for making those very important points, and many more indeed. So Peter, I wanted to kick off this conversation with you. You've played a very important part in government, outside government, and you've been one of the sort of core activists, if I may put it this way, in this project, in this initiative. And what do you think? I mean, there are other initiatives around, right? What makes this distinctive and different? Please.
Great. Thanks very much, Shada, and good morning to all of you. I want to first briefly thank High Representative Mogherini for the vision and for the impetus to start this journey to create something very distinctive. As you said, Shada, there's a lot of action and activity in the space of religion and world affairs. So what makes this new initiative distinctive? I think there's three primary ways in which we can think of the added value of an exchange program like this. One is the fact that, as is well known to many of you in this room, there is today a veritable circuit of conferences and summits that occur all around the world on a regular basis that bring together religious leaders, making very important points and raising their voices together to emphasize the importance of values like tolerance and pluralism, and statements are issued. And what this platform has the opportunity to do is to engage a different sector of this kind of work, to focus on those who are already at work in the world, at the level of communities, at the level of societies. Where religion is not just some abstract set of theological texts, but rather religion is something lived, religion in the world. And so we have the opportunity here to aggregate, to cross-fertilize, build connections and partnerships between people around the world in diverse contexts doing work that has a very tangible impact. And so I think this is an important complement, therefore, to existing spaces of discourse and conferences that are kind of creating and projecting the importance of underlying values, and this is where those values get turned into action. So that's one point of distinctiveness. A second, I think, is found in the very specific language, the name of this initiative, this phrase, religion in society. In my experience, both in government service and outside, where religious engagement is not something new, I think we've sometimes fallen into a habit of doing religious engagement in a way that kind of puts religion and religious actors off to one side, gives them a room somewhere, and you talk to them and you engage with them, and you said, okay, I've now engaged with the religious actors, and then we're done. I think this is an approach that really tries to make the point that religion is not something separate. Religion is an integral part of civil society. And so the way that this initiative will be structured is not one that seeks to uniquely focus on and lift the voices and work of religious actors, but rather to create opportunities for, yes, faith-based organizations and faith-based actors, but also those who would not necessarily identify in those terms as being faith-based, but who nonetheless share a common commitment to addressing the plight of refugees, for example, building inclusive and pluralistic societies to work together across the faith, non-faith-based divide. So that bringing together of faith-based and non-faith-based actors, I think, is very distinctive. And finally, I think there's something distinctive about the geographic scope of this initiative. What I think is really unique and remarkable about this approach is that it's not one that assumes that the problems are out there in the world and European experts and European resources will provide answers to those problems. It's the idea that challenges around religion and social inclusion are equally present here in Europe, and that there are experiences and legacies of situations and settings outside Europe that actually have something to offer to the challenges that European societies find themselves in today. So it is that genuine cross-fertilization and exchange between different contexts.
Right, so thank you, Peter. So the added value actually is of people who are already working on these issues, bringing faith-based and non-faith-based people together, and the global sort of context of what we're talking about. Swati, to come to you now, you've also been sort of crafting and been an important player in this journey, working in India on intercommunal, interreligious coexistence, if you like. What are the experiences that you bring into this discussion, and what do you see at its major value?
Well, thank you so much.
They are on, just keep speaking, yeah.
First of all, I really thank
Do we have it louder, please?
For this wonderful opportunity. As a participant of Lokahi exchange program in London, I came to know about myself first, because I'm not very much a religious person, frankly speaking. But I think respect to my own religion is a starting point to respect others. It's not the less things to respect yourself than to respect others, but the concept of I and other is the starting point of the inclusion. And walking with a long journey with the human rights issues in India, as a researcher, as a faculty for inclusion and exclusion department in Schoolguru Eduserve, what I'm doing right now, I came to know that the students from different geographical background, irrespective of their personal presence as a student, but with the distance learning mode, you should respect first to listen. Listening is the first thing to respect. So from India, I came to know about the factors of multiculturalism and the ethnic values. And with the understanding with my journey from PhD to till now, with the human rights to dialogue practitioners, I try to acquire the sense of adaptability, acceptability, and assimilation. That is a concept. And India, as a vast example of the biggest democracy, has also so many challenges. Right now we can able to know. For example, Kashmir is a burning issues right now. But when we address, as Mogherini said, that we always try to focus on the negative version of media, social media, and the individual level, we actually try to forget the good memories with the Kashmir, with Indo-Pakistan relations. Same with the India-Bangladesh relations. It's the understanding of each other as a friend, as a colleague, as day by day challenges are coming around. But we try to listen other stories, other narratives of their own understanding, the concept of religion for their own. and with the journey of the dialogue practitioners of IRD, that is intercommunal and interreligious dialogue, not as a religious perspective, but also as a cultural perspective. That with the cultural understanding, we can actually understand the underlying concept of religion. So from Indian context, I would really like to emphasize on the word culture first. Rather to use the religion inclusion, it is the cultural inclusion for all of us. So to address the present issues of the security, religion is playing a vital role in Indian context, where we should act as an important component to motivate people for the peaceful coexistence, not to motivate people with the negative vibes or the negative narratives, rather with the positive understanding to each other. So it is my understanding that with the virtue of human rights, we all are different. Humans are different with each other, linguistically, ethnically, and with the mental understanding. But if we actually exist into this inclusive society, we can achieve the religious tolerance, harmony, and brotherhood, starting from a very individual level, then to the institutional level.
Okay.
So civil society is part of the journey. And with the Lokahi exchange program, I'd really like to thank Professor Peter, Professor Gwen, and Professor Jagbir, who actually helped us a lot to know about the dialogue exchange program and how it could implement into the personal level understanding and the network that we built actually in the journey of London the last December.
And this just explains, Swati, so this journey in London, this was the pilot project, was it?
Yes,
The Global Exchange pilot project.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was an interesting journey for all of us as a participant. And we came to know each other that the situation is actually same, but the narratives are not the same. So negative and positive narratives were there. And if we can actually cultivate and we put fertilizers into the positive things, so that makes changes, and that is the main thing to overcome the challenges what is present in Indian context.
Right, so that pilot project brought together people, as we saw in the video as well, Peter, so these were people from different countries, different activities, different professions, and faith-based and non-faith-based at the same time. And the impact was that you got to know each other, and you understood the differences, but also respected each other. And that's what's going to become a global program now, global exchange, right? Can you just explain a little bit your experience with that pilot project?
Yes, absolutely. And I should add that many of the participants in those pilot initiatives are here with us and will be able to speak to you very directly about their experiences. This was, if you will, the initial proof of concept.
Okay.
You know, I think wisely the European Union, before investing fully in this kind of work, you know, wanted to see what it looked like in practice. And so we had the opportunity to bring together 40 different practitioners from literally all over the world in 2 settings late last year and earlier this year. And, you know, Swati has already spoken to the unique quality of that interaction. I think people who absolutely did not know each other at all came together and left a week later with not just new friendships, but new experiences, new expertise and ideas, and the potential, and in some cases, the reality of ongoing partnership and collaboration. And the idea now is precisely to scale up that kind of experience through the initiative that High Representative Mogherini has just announced.
Right. So, Ms. Mogherini, you've heard what our 2 friends have said. In terms of, so you're trying to create, and I think a lot of people here are change makers, right? And to empower them, amplify their voice. What are the challenges that you see in the coming years, having launched this very important initiative? What are the challenges you're prepared to tackle?
Well, first of all, I think the first challenge, is it on? Yes. The first challenge is to, as both of you have said somehow, to recognize that religion is part of the identity and the culture, and it's not something you can simply set aside in a separate box. And I say this being someone that has grown up as a Catholic, but is a non-believer today. But I'm always rather skeptical when I see that there is a certain fear to accept that elements of religion as a belief or as a culture are part of our identity as human beings and as communities. Again, I'm not a believer, but if you take arts and literature in Italy and you don't know anything about the Catholic Church, you hardly understand Dante or Michelangelo. So it is not something to fear. It is something that is part of us, and is part of our communities, and is part of our societies. And I think the first challenge is this, to bridge somehow this fear that maybe understandably on an institutional and even political level is there, either to instrumentalize religion or to think it is something to keep separate from the rest of the public discourse. Fear is never a good advisor. So I hope that this instrument will, in very small, starting from the grassroots, starting from something little, will help us bridge this gap that is created by this fear of accepting that religious is part of our culture and our societies. And it can be a non-dividing, but it can be a bridge builder element. The second challenge probably is more practical, would be to give continuity and consolidate this project, because it took us 2 years to set it up, to think of it. I would like to thank the team that has been working on this, not only you but also in our institutions, because it has required a certain element, a certain level of creativity and stubbornness and perseverance to find a way. I'm very happy I can launch it before I leave mandate, and I hope that the challenge of consolidating it, giving it continuity, a budget, and making it growth will be overcome. But I'm quite confident that this can be the case. And then again, I think these are the two main challenges. I don't see a big challenge in terms of this succeeding in practical terms, because again, practice teaches us, has shown us in this year that there are plenty of interesting and good and useful stories that can fuel this kind of project in a very constructive manner. And I have no doubt that it will grow if it is allowed to grow in a way that somehow is similar to the Erasmus. The Erasmus project is so successful because not only you study at university, and if you ask any Erasmus student, he or she would never mention the studies he or she has made during the Erasmus, but all the rest. The studies are also important, but it's the human dimension of it that has created the European citizenship in a couple of generations now. I hope and I believe that this program, in very small and humble terms, can help also building a sort of, not in this case European, but global sense of belonging across these communities or across these practitioners or activists. In this case, regardless of their different backgrounds, being that cultural, ethnic, or religious. As the Erasmus program has helped us building a European identity, regardless of our national backgrounds. I have this hope.
And it is a very good hope to have, a very noble hope to have, especially in these times. Technology, of course, will help, right? I was wondering, Swati, if you could talk about what you see as the key sort of issues you'll need to tackle to make this a successful exchange program.
Well, in my context, as a faculty for a distance learning program in human rights and women's studies, I found that it is very, very important to make the student understandable with the journey and how a religion could play a vital role in their teaching life, as a student life. Because most of them in India, they are not much aware about other religion. And here I found that after finishing as a global fellow from Lokahi team, funded by you, I can make myself very much positive as a human being first, and I could penetrate the sense of religion in society with the understandable and tangible factors to my student. So I think it would be more helpful in the upcoming days. So we could see the positive changes among the students, you know, with this journey and with the stories, whatever we have from my fellow friends. So I could share with short stories from all over the world. So I think that makes changes in the upcoming years.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to take a couple of questions from the floor now, because I think we need to interact, and that's exactly what I want to achieve. Ms. Guigou, Elizabeth Guigou, would you like to intervene very quickly? Thank you very much. Just identify yourself very quickly. President of Anna Lindh Foundation.
Thank you. Well, I am, thank you, Shada. I am president of the Anna Lindh Foundation, which is a Euro-Mediterranean foundation for cultural dialogue. And of course, we are a gathering of 42 countries and more than 4,500 NGOs. Our work is mainly oriented towards youth. And I would like to thank first Federica Mogherini for this very important initiative, because, of course, as you already stressed, religion is one very difficult question that we have to face and not to put aside. And it's, of course, by dialogue between faith and non-faith, people and organization, that we can have better mutual understanding. So I would like to stress that at the Anna Lindh Foundation, first, our work is wholly centered in, of course, mutual understanding, fighting stereotypes, and advocating for capacity of youth in understanding what is at work in societies, and of course to work on social cohesion and cultural understanding and respect, as Federica very rightly said. Now, I hope that during this day there are some difficult questions that will be addressed, because in all our work we have a lot of good stories to show. Right. You know, our youth can tell. Federica knows them very well. So, but there are very difficult questions. First, how do we analyze rightly the history of religions in our different countries? It's very important. Second, how is it that all religions advocate peace and love, like was said 50 years ago at Woodstock, and nevertheless all religions have lived with extremist and even more with violent expressions, and that is true everywhere in history, and unfortunately even now. And third, what are the places of the place of religions in our different societies? Of course, in our research work, we very well show that the place of religion in society is more important in the South Mediterranean than in Europe, where there is some kind of separation between spiritual life and political life, for example. But more than that, and so what is the effect on cultural dialogue? And more than that, there are what are the position of religion as far as gender equality is concerned, right, as far as minorities, all sorts of minorities are concerned. And I think that if we can, progress in that. Now, youth dialogue is absolutely central. This is why the Erasmus program, as Federica Mogherini just raised, is so important.
Right.
I'm very happy that, that Ursula von der Leyen endorsed the objective of Jean-Claude Juncker to triple the budget. And my last word will be to say that I think that if we create an Erasmus for NGOs, then we will have a new instrument apart from the one that does exist between universities or with apprenticeship or with other centers. I think we will have a new instrument to promote the kind of dialogue that you want.
Right. Ms. Mogherini, I will come to you towards the end with your comments, and to the two of you as well. If I could just make a plea for brevity in your questions so that we can actually go back to the panelists and get some good responses. So, sir, please. Identify yourself, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Bruno Mars from the ACT Alliance, Action by Churches Together. I want to congratulate for this initiative. I think it's a big step in states and also institutions like the European Union to recognize the role of religion in society. But also, I think that's very important that the religions, communities and institutions also not stay only in the recognition part, but also act as such. But that, of course, brings other risks. And I see a big risks when we will deal with issues relating religion in society is the intersection between fundamentalisms. How we will connect the religious fundamentalism with the economic and the political one. Do you see any risk in this equation? Especially considering the status of the world today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. My name is Antti. I'm Pendikan, and I'm Finn affiliated with George Mason, also with Susan to USIP. My question is that some of the people that we want to bring in this program may not be as appreciated, or actually can be persecuted by the religious authorities of their countries. So how can we safeguard this program becoming a safe haven rather than taken over by those same authorities?
Thank you very much. There's a question here. I will come to you at the back. I am coming. If you're short, I have a chance to go to many people.
Yes, my name is Volker Beresheim. I'm Ambassador for Religion and Foreign Policy of the Federal Republic of Germany. And I welcome this initiative of the European Union for several reasons. First is we also made the experience that it is valuable to have religious actors from different beliefs coming together. We had a conference with the same effect about 2 years ago, together with our colleagues from Finland, and Ambassador Pekka Metso, who is more experienced than I am, is here with us. And based on this experience, the Federal President of the Federal Republic of Germany decided not to reinvent the wheel, but to to support existing networks of religious leaders. And as we see here, there are already many who are engaged in interfaith activities with.
So could I ask you to get to the point very quickly now?
Yes, I'm coming to the point.
Thank you.
We supported the network of Religions for Peace with thousands of religious leaders, interfaith, 2 weeks ago in a conference in Lindau. And I came to the conclusion, and this is the point.
Thank you.
That indeed the European Union has an important role to play in this setup, because there is no other body around that I see which enjoys such a level of political credibility, that in this time we are living in, you all mentioned the problems that we are facing, this credibility in interacting with religious leaders is the biggest asset that we have.
Right.
And Mrs. Mogherini, I thank you, and I can assure you that you will have the support from one member country at least, which is the Federal Republic of Germany, in this approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I had a lady putting up her hand at the back there. She has not put up her hand there, so please, yourself, yes. let's see how many questions I can take. I don't guarantee everyone gets a voice this time, in this session. Please.
Yes, hello. I'm the Reverend Bonnie Evans-Hills. I think you saw a little bit earlier. I'm a priest in the Church of England, and I also do some work with the UN Office for Genocide Prevention. This is the global plan of action for religious leaders. And my question is, I've been in refugee camps in southern Iraq, and I've seen how religion works together with the UN and with government in providing humanitarian support for refugees. What are we doing? We're traumatizing those who arrive on our shores, and we're also preventing people from arriving. We've criminalized rescue at sea, and we pay for part-fund, I would call them concentration camps in Libya. So how can we share in order to receive better? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Could I take the gentleman over there, please? Keep your hand up. Yourself, yes. Short and to the point, please.
Yes, hi. Hello, Yusuf Kobo from co-founder of Gabriel. Gabriel is a non-profit that brings together Jewish and Muslim youth. First of all, I want to congratulate everybody on this initiative, but I'm a bit disappointed. There's a lack of youth in this room, and youth are very important in this discussion. To get to my question, we've been talking about, and I totally agree that community leaders in the different religious society need to step their game up and promote dialogue and understanding and interaction.
I need a question.
And the question is, but from our elected officials, with the rise of populism, nativism, nationalism, and so on, what have they been doing the past 3-4 years to protect religious communities around Europe?
Okay, thank you very much. I can take 2 more questions. Let me take the lady over there. Yes, please. 2 more questions, please, to the point. Yeah. May I just say that this conversation is going to continue. We have a full day of conversation, so I will beg your compassion for me. I will not be able to take all questions. Please.
My name is Mine Yıldırım from the Freedom of Belief Initiative in Turkey. My question is about the inclusivity of this program. Can you elaborate on how inclusivity will be ensured? I'm thinking particularly about the gender issues, but also diversity within different religious communities and non-believers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And sir? Yeah.
Yes, my name is Pekka Metso. I'm a Peace Facilitation Ambassador from Finland.
Just a second. Yeah.
And my question is that how do you take into consideration the inclusion of human rights work in this exchange, all different sort of minorities? Gender, of course, is very important. How do you guarantee that those are included?
Right. And gentleman over here, please. You've been putting up your hand. Yes, yes.
Stand up. Sorry, my name's Shabir Beg and I'm from Scotland, and the organisation is Scottish Aloe Bait Society. My question is directly to yourself, Commissioner. What part will Scotland play when we exit, which unfortunately we're going to do as Scots, because we're very proud. We're proud to be European. We're proud to be here. We're just about to lose an identity in which I was born in. What plans do you have for me?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much indeed, Mr. Beg. So let's go back to our panel. Some very, very important questions, some very relevant questions to do with the political geopolitics that we're dealing with, and all the challenges that you will face, but also the importance of working together. I think. Thank you very much indeed. Nice diversity of questions. Federica, I will come to you at the end. I'd like to take first Peter, Swati, and then give you the floor last.
Okay. Thank you very much to all of you for being very frank and forthcoming in putting forward the fact that there are a number of challenges that any initiative like this will have to confront. I wanted to kind of add to your reflections by bringing up very briefly a couple that have been on my mind as we've gone through the work of conceptualizing this initiative. One is something that a number of you have already touched on, which is the fact that change makers naturally foster enemies. There are a lot of people who don't like change. There are a number of groups, but also, frankly, a number of governments around the world today for whom fostering division and exclusionary politics is a technique of governance. And so, in implementing this, we will have to be very eyes wide open and keenly aware that many of the participants in these groups may come to the attention of and be perceived as sources of risk, not just to incumbent religious authorities, for example, as Antti mentioned, not just to those on the more extreme ends of the spectrum ideologically, but even to the governments in the countries in which they reside. So that's one challenge. A second challenge, I think, relates to the fact that, as many of you in this room know, within the universe galaxy of religion and world affairs, there are two particularly large heavenly bodies that exert gravitational force. One is a set of conversations around freedom of religion and belief, and one is a set of conversations about the role of religion as a causal factor in violent extremism. I think that one of the challenges this initiative will face will be to resist being drawn too heavily into the orbit of either of these two existing spaces, to allow its autonomy to come out. But I think it's also important for us to recognize that properly implemented, this kind of work will necessarily have a positive impact on issues related to freedom of religion and belief, and will necessarily have a positive impact on challenges relating to religion and extremism. And finally, the question of inclusivity was raised. I think there's a great opportunity here to shift the center of gravity and locus of the conversation about religious engagement away from, if you don't mind me saying, usually groups of old men with very impressive sounding formal religious titles who usually get called the religious leaders, and to recognize that in many societies around the world, it is women and young religious leaders that actually have the stronger voice and the greater influence. And so I think by taking this work to the level of communities, which is where they are most present and most influential, we have the opportunity to raise up those voices. But it is a challenge that we need to be particularly focused on. Thank you.
So the inclusiveness element is going to be quite central to this project?
Not just in terms of making sure that women and younger religious leaders are included, but the specific framing of religion in society is designed to privilege and lift the importance of collaboration between faith-based actors and those who approach the same kinds of issues and challenges, but not necessarily from a faith-based perspective, to avoid simply having a set of conversations among religious actors off in some corner while the other work proceeds in a different room. Bring them all together in the same room as they approach and work together to address common challenges.
Public good. Please, Swati.
Yeah, I would like to include one thing as a pilot component and as a pilot team, part of pilot team. I must congratulate the selection procedure because in our particular program in London, I found that 65% participants are women. So that's a wow, because when we are talking about religion, women are somehow missing, and old age men are always dominating, with the vibes of the very heavy words. But it was very, very positive thing for us, and to share about our own stories as a woman, religion inclusion in a gender inclusive perspective. And number two is, one gentleman rightly pointed out the participation of the youth. I found myself a very young person. Don't you think so? Thank you. Well, yeah, of course. As a representative of the youth group, when I returned back to India, I was talking with my students. They are very young, like 18 to 24 years old. So yes, I try to make them understand that what is religion for them. They are from Jewish community, they are from Christian community, they are from Muslim community, So India, I think, a vast, inclusive identity of the all religion background, and answer to the minority. Yes, we have the indigenous community as well. So many indigenous population are there, and the students always. Their problem is lack of knowledge. They don't know much about others. So I try to make them, because religion as a word, very, very sensitive. People don't want to intervene in their own religion and the others. So it's a very sensitive issues. And as a faculty for human rights, I try to intervene with a very sensitivity perspective, as a gender perspective as well. So yes, I think we could somehow manage the inclusive as a word, not as a word, but as a understanding, yes, as a practitioners. Yes, I think that's all from my side.
Thank you very much. Federica, please.
Thank you. Well, I hope you don't expect now that I play the role of the one that has to defend the role of older men in the room. but still, they do contribute positively, sometimes positively, sometimes less, as young women to our work. Jokes apart. As somebody has said, this is not about duplicating existing instruments. This is not about reinventing the wheel. This is simply, which is very complicated, because simple things are the most complicated ones to achieve, to create something small for people and organizations that don't go global naturally. Local communities. And that is, I hope, the natural amplifier of the role of young people and women. Because the more you go small and local, this is awful to say, but this is the reality we're living in, the more you find women and young people leading the way, rather than if you go on stage on the global level. So at big conferences internationally, you might find less diversity than you would find at a local community meeting somewhere in the world, no matter where. The idea is exactly this, not to reinvent fora that already exist, or organizations that already exist, but to try and empower or give instruments to those that are already working on the grassroots and local level and connect the dots. This is why we refer to the Erasmus, because the Erasmus program was not reinventing universities. It was simply, very complicated and very powerful, but simply an instrument to connect existing universities and giving an additional tool to those that were already studying, and for a limited period of time. And it became an amplifier of connections, ideas, creativity, identity, and to me the most important, knowledge not in academic terms, but human knowledge. And I think this is the key. What I found in my experience, including in institutions, but already in university, already in the academic world, even in relation with public opinion and media, I find that there's a sort of taboo. People don't want to talk about religion. And this is because there's a certain fear of not being accepted or of not wanting to accept. And at the end of the day, the basic element of respect is first a strong identity of yourself. If you're afraid, if you feel weak, you will never accept, or you will always see the other as a threat. So the more you know diversity, the less you're afraid of it. Then you might not like the other, but at least you know what you're talking about. Stereotype sometimes are real, but most of the times are built on lack of knowledge. So creating this networks that can allow us to spread human knowledge could be a very powerful element of dismantling that way of using divides for negative agendas. I would put it this way. And again, it's empowering people. People in themselves might do good work or less good work. An instrument in itself is not a guarantee for the work to be good, but it offers an instrument, a tool, to amplify things if they're good. Obviously, it could also amplify things that are not good, but this is in your hands. No project has a guarantee that it would amplify and serve in itself positive experiences, but there's a good chance of finding and connecting interesting experience around the world and offering inspiration and ideas. I can share with you three sources of inspiration for me in these last years, decades actually, that tell me this might be a very useful, small, with humble ambitions instrument for us to, also for us Europeans, to dismantle some of our fears in handling with these things. In 97, I graduated in the University of Rome, political science, and I wanted to write a thesis on political Islam, the role of religion and politics in the Muslim world. And in the political science faculty of the biggest university in Europe, I was told this is not a political science issue. You have to go to Islamic studies in literature. I said, what? We're far away now. We're far away now, but the root of this thinking is still there. Religion has nothing to be mixed with this. While the source, the reference to a source of legitimacy that has links in religion is not new to the Catholic world, is not new to even the European political families, and it's not neutral in the Muslim world or in other parts of the world. This is only to mention that there is a taboo to dismantle in some parts of. The second thing was a true shock for me a few years ago. I said publicly, Islam is part of European history, of European present, and most likely of European future. And this came as something for which I was attacked for months. And this is a simple reality, because we have many European Muslims that have no other nationality but European. This is exactly an example of how politics could use, or is tempted to use, religion either for legitimizing policies or political parties. We could have plenty of examples about that. I would not go into that. Or demonize. And I think that going to the empowerment of the reality on the ground is the best antidote we have to that way of having an instrumental use. Instrumental is not the proper English word. Having a distorted use of religion in politics. Going to the real thing, which is grassroots, which is community, which is the people that really do the job, in Europe or elsewhere, I think is the best antidote we have to the ideologization of religion in institutions, in politics, and even in societies. So empowering those that are really there, which is what this instrument could achieve, I think serves this purpose. And then something I mentioned to you already, this experience I had in Indonesia, but I could add exchanges I had in other parts of the world with community leaders. Maybe even calling them leaders would not be appropriate. With community workers, with people that spend their daily life, part of their daily life, doing this. Gives you a sense of we can learn from one another. We can exchange. Again, something good can come out of this, something completely irrelevant can come out of this, but definitely not something dangerous can come out of this. So I think that, again, we're not proposing the solution to all the problems of the world. We will have to look for that elsewhere. But I think we are launching today a small thing that could contribute in positive terms to empowering more of those good stories to grow, and hopefully more of the people of goodwill to have more instruments in their hands to build something good. Then there have been questions that do not relate to this as such. And we could go on forever on this. And I understand from the nervousness of the people that are here with me that time is not, we still have 2 minutes. For sure, this is not a place where we can talk about migration and refugee policies. But those of you who know me personally or not know how much we've been fighting for a humane approach to this and how much difficult it has been. But I'm proud of one thing, that against a strong wind that is blowing, we've managed to, first of all, save many lives. I wish we could have saved more. Every life that you lose is one too much. Second, we've managed to finance a lot of UN and international NGO work in the countries of origin and transit to save and assist people. And you don't see the EU flag on this. And probably some of the projects you have seen are financed by us, but you don't see the EU flag on this. And maybe we should put it, because it's part of the job, I think. But this is for the next commission to think how we can brand the projects we finance on the humanitarian and development work. And that we have managed to build a network of respectful relations with those around the world that care about people. Again, the wind is blowing different direction, but I think this is a fight that is worth fighting for every single person, not only at sea, but also in the desert and before they leave, because dramatic stories can be heard from the very beginning of, and here again, communities, included religious communities around the world, can help us a lot, also in this. And Scotland. I still represent 28 member states. The UK is always welcome to stay. You should tell me what's going to happen. We stand by and see what will happen. I still, and I'm quite sure at least until the very end of my mandate, I will continue to represent 28 member states. Happily so. And for the rest, we'll see, as our friends in the Arab world say, inshallah. It's in your hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Federica. I said to you when you came in that I'm really going to miss our conversations. You've always been such an empathetic person to speak to, and you really go to the heart of the issues that we're talking about without fear. And that is something we need to really admire about you. So we will miss you, but I know that you'll still be a force to be reckoned with in this geopolitical mess that we live in. You've talked about so many important things. I mean, many of our leaders in the West and elsewhere are giving us a masterclass in hatred and fear. And it's to hear people like you that sort of reassure us that there is another voice, another sentiment that is there among leaders as well. And every long journey, as many say, starts with a small step. And I think what you're launching today, I'm very privileged, I think, to be part of this. You also talked about leaders, and I think this is a very important point to remember. It's not only the religious leaders. Religious leaders are important, but leaders of all kinds, the change makers that people like the Anna Lindh Foundation are also working with. And girl power. I mean, you talked about 18 to 24. I think the girls today, the teenagers, Greta, etc., 16, right? Those working against gun control. She's, yes. 14, 15, 16, these are the girls that I think we are really admiring. And the other point you've made, and I think this global exchange will help us to achieve that, is when you live in diversity, when you encounter diversity, you don't fear it anymore. So thank you very much indeed to all three of you for your interventions, very powerful. Thank you for your questions. Please join me in once again giving our panelists an applause, and good luck. vas-tu? Ça va? No, no, excuse me. Sorry. There is no break. We go seamlessly. Could I have the...
Try to stimulate Muslim families.
There is no break now.
The closest friends is to share with the whole country. We all have this...
There is no break now. Okay, guys, just come up.
But not with a stranger closer to the door. And that's where I feel that...
Yeah, can you make sure that it does? Thank you. Ah, right, okay. The bell? Somebody has a bell? So, friends and colleagues, there is no coffee break now. That comes after the panel that we're going to hold now. So could I ask the panelists for this panel discussion to please come up to the stage? So, Azza and Merete, please. So could you please all take your seats again?
Welcoming space for everyone of any background. Doesn't matter what religion you are, gender, identity, culture, language.
Merete?
I'm the Reverend Bonnie Evans Hills, and I'm a priest in the Church of England, but I also do some work with the UN Office for Genocide Prevention, so this is a welcome church. So it's not just about refugees, and it's not just about the poor, it's about people who are...
Could I ask everyone to please take their seats?
This is a safe space for them. Liverpool is a port city, so people have been coming in from all over the world into this city, in and out again, for centuries.
Okay, could I think Merete is...
The cafe, you see all different people from all different backgrounds coming together. I've been working in interreligious dialogue for a very long time, and it's that neighborhood, community, one-on-one relationship building that does the most good. People are able to listen to one another, become close to one another, and to learn their stories, and have respect and regard for one another. To look after each other from a humanitarian perspective rather than one of fear.
You're doing such a lovely job.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please do sit down. Indisciplined lot that you are.
Yes, we talked over serious issues, but we also shared something of our own personal concerns as well. We got to know one another.
Thank you very much. And I have. Okay. So we've heard. Why am I getting an echo?
That it is part of the problem, but then it must also be part of the solution. My name is Haydal Kowi, and I'm the Director of Foreign Relations.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes.
Institute in Najaf, Iraq.
Right, so let's go into our second panel. And we've talked a lot about the global exchange, all the nuts and bolts of how this is going to work. But this question of intersectionality between religion and foreign policy and religion and society is not just restricted or limited to what the European Union is doing. This is also being done elsewhere, United States and the United Nations. And religion and foreign policy is, of course, now the topic of our panel discussion. And I'm going to kick off with Azza Karam. Azza, you have worked in several important functions. You worked within international organizations, and you're working very closely on issues to do with religion and with vulnerable people. And I was just wondering, from your point of view, what are the key lessons you have learned that you would like to share with us in this conversation?
Thank you very much, Shada, and congratulations on the initiative. I think it's always very important to begin by always thanking the ancestors and those who do the work before us and pave the road. And for the purpose of us being here today, I just want to specifically acknowledge Merete Bilde, who is with me here, who has been absolutely instrumental in championing this work across the European Union. And it doesn't make any sense talking to experience and expertise without giving credit to those who spend so much time and effort and commitment.
So Azza, give us, you are a senior advisor at the Social and Cultural Development at the United Nations Population Fund. That's what you're doing at the moment. But of course, your history with international organizations goes back a long way. So, for your advice.
couple of things. First of all, I think it's important not to forget that what we're talking about is people's faith. It's not religious institutions, religious leaders, religious NGOs. We are quintessentially talking about people's faith. And this is a terrain that is as deeply personal, deeply intimate, as it is highly politically sensitive and publicly flammable. So when we deal with these issues, we have to deal from a position of incredible humility and respect, whether we are believers ourselves or not. And I happen to be a believer, like many of us. But because I'm a believer, I think it's even more important to begin by saying we don't talk about religion in the abstract. And congratulations indeed on a platform that will put religion in society. It is of society. But please always bear in mind that we're talking about what people believe in. And as such, this is not a simple matter of ideology. It's not a simple matter of politics. It is a quintessentially complicated matter of belief. How do we operate within this space of acknowledging the value of religion in our identities and our social and public spaces, and at the same time be deeply respectful of how each individual believes, is precisely the conundrum and the challenge here. So while I'm one of those who's the first to celebrate the fact that we put religion in such a central space, I am also the first one to decry what we're doing. Because I think we don't necessarily have that sensitivity and the sensibility towards other people's notion of what it means to have faith and to believe. And so we must always keep that in mind as a check, a very serious check against every single project, policy, idea, plan, intention that we have, that we are dealing with people's faith.
Can I interrupt you for a second, Azza?
Absolutely.
Give us an example of what you fear or what has been done that you've seen as something negative and should not be followed.
I think what we're actually seeing today is that religion has become one of the many ideologies that is today being focused on in the same way that we saw liberalism and communism and what have you. And we almost make the mistake of assuming that it's the same kind of thing and we now need to focus on it. It's like democracy, governance, human rights. Let's now look at religion and ... And in so doing, we are seeing the plethora of initiatives and institutions which are trying to centralize the focus on religion, but are doing so as though looking at it as though it is separate from what people actually are deeply believing in. We've made religion into a commodity. A commercial commodity, a transactional commodity. And this is where one of the questions that was raised earlier in the last session about the fundamentalisms that we need to realize. At the end of the day, fundamentalisms is about sticking to your own guns. It's about really believing in the elements of a certain system or belief system. Religious fundamentalism is precisely rooted in that notion that you have to be deeply literal about certain things, in this case, belief. But I think if we begin to look at religion as a transactional, as an ideology, we tend to forget that we're looking at religion as people's faiths and that we're dealing with people's faiths. The irony is that the very same attention that we're paying to religion today, that very same attention in and of itself belies or underlines a way of looking at religion that is actually disconnected from the fact that it is about people's faith. Because we have itemized it, we have categorized it, and we're putting it in this public space, which underlines why it's important to have platforms such as this, quintessentially bringing those who believe and those who don't believe to discuss the role of religion, always with a view to being sensitive to the fact that this is fundamentally about, at the end of the day, about people's faith systems. Do you want me to go on with the lessons learned?
I mean, you're working at the UN Population Fund, right?
Yeah.
And religion, within that context, has a very powerful impact. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing there. How do you, I wouldn't say the word counter, but balance that impact of religion?
So the UN Population Fund is probably one of those institutions in the United Nations system that is most like the European Union in terms of its approach towards religion many, many years ago. When we started doing this work in 2000, the concern was that there was a tremendous amount of knee-jerk fear reaction that you heard Ms. Mogherini speak about before, about religion is feared. It is misunderstood, it is feared, and then it is seen as a deep problem. Now, those of us who work in areas of sexual and reproductive health, by the way, which includes every single taboo issue in every single religion,
absolutely,
don't quite have the luxury, never had the luxury of not doing religion, because religion used to find us. when we would much rather not have dealt with them, the religious actors and communities often always singled UNFPA out, still do, for aha, you're doing all the nasty stuff that we're not supposed to be doing, and you're making it into policies when it's all about what God said, and you're trying to tell us that there's human rights about it. So yes, the UNFPA, the UN Population Fund, has had the longest experience in the UN system out of 60 entities in the UN, has had the longest experience of having to come face to face with what it means to deal with religion. Yep. And therefore has been forced, if you will, to develop a sensibility about this, simply because you have this exchange, which is a very visceral exchange, both within the institution of the United Nations, where we have some very healthy secular fundamentalists, and from outside within the different religious institutions. Because of that wisdom, if you will, that comes with having to deal with these issues for ever since its inception, there was a very deliberate attempt already in 2000 to do the following. And this relates to your earlier question about the lessons. One, we're dealing with people's faith. So it's not about institutionalizing, and it's not about creating new organizations and new entities and new platforms. It's about trying to understand what's already there, existing, vibrant, problematic, and empowering. Two, it isn't about empowering. Very sorry to disturb, but it's really not about empowering. And it's not the role of a multilateral entity to empower. It is the role, in this case, of a multilateral entity to listen and learn. And it is not the role of a multilateral entity to tell the religious what to do, but it is perhaps for the first time in our existence as multilateral entities, the role of us to listen and learn what we may not be doing right. And that is a deeply problematic space to be in, because we're very busy telling everyone else what to do because we've got it all figured out. And then to have to realize that from the very same sectors from which we receive the deepest kind of resistance and misunderstanding, those are the same sectors which we must be listening to. And that is a profound mental attitude change that still confronts us. Third, it is quintessentially about the encounter. It is the encounter, as opposed to the projects and the programs and the initiatives that are going to be rolled out and done. It is about the encounter. And that encounter is a moment of truth for the policies, the ideologies that we ourselves believe and maintain very strongly. And last but by no means least, there's plenty of other lessons, but by no means least, it's about being protective of those who are upholding the human rights within those religious spaces, because quintessentially it's about protecting the human rights defenders. And believe it or not, some of the oldest and most established human rights defenders historically have been religious actors and people of faith. Mm-hmm. And we are miserable at protecting human rights defenders. We're very good in multilateral contexts about speaking about them, about advocating, but we're not very good at protecting human rights defenders because we're very busy building a business out of the work that we do with them and about them. And that's why it's extremely important to understand that the word humility is not a word, it's not a lip service, but it is an attitude which many of us in multilateral institutions, whether the EU or the UN or the AU or what have you, actually don't necessarily approach work with that humility in mind.
Okay, thank you very much. Strong words, very frank speaking. Thank you, Azza. Susan Hayward, you're Senior Advisor on Religion and Inclusive Societies at the US Institute for Peace. That's your job at the moment, but you've been very active within government, outside government, working on a number of issues to do with religion in society. Two questions for you, and you can answer them slowly. So one is about your work with US diplomats. How did you find, and how were they understanding and engaging on these issues? Lessons for us here in Europe to learn from that. First question, please.
Okay, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. This is something like a big family reunion. So it's wonderful to see familiar faces and looking forward to getting to know others as well. So in terms of the US government's understanding of religion and its intersection with foreign policy and engagement with religion, I think we've come a long way and we have a long way yet to go. One thing just to note from the outset is that the US is peculiar in a couple ways, or in more than a couple ways, but in a couple ways with respect to this. One is that among Western states, we're in some respects the most secular and the most religious. So that we're the most secular in the legal and bureaucratic sense of the separation between religion and state, with a very strong barrier, legal barrier, an institutional barrier to ensure that the government funds, government institutions aren't being used to advance particular interpretations of religion or to to favor particular religious institutions or traditions. But at the same time, we're a very religious society, and religion plays a very fulsome role in public discourse, in being a part of discussions about the directions of policies and priorities for programming, and as well as just religious expression within society and religious practice within society. And I think there's actually a relationship between those two things that are mutually enforcing, but the idea that secularism means not religious is not part of how we think about secularism and religion in the US. So we have a little bit of a different starting place, I think, from our European colleagues in that sense. And it's the fact that religion is such a visible and influential force within society and within politics that I think has made us a little bit more comfortable, less of the fear of religion, and a little bit more comfortable to both recognize the importance of understanding the religious dimension in foreign policy issues and to engage with religious actors as a component of that. Now, it's not to say that it's been without fits and starts, and it hasn't been a linear evolution of effective and sensitive religious engagement, but we did start a couple decades ago in trying to build out, recognizing that there was a gap in our foreign policy and our diplomatic engagement, and trying to address that gap. So the U.S. Institute of Peace is actually a quasi-governmental and independent federal institution, and the religion program there, which I lead, has been in existence for 30 years. And so I'm very thrilled that when I came there 12 years ago, religion was already mainstreamed, religious considerations. So across the countries where we work, across the different thematic areas that we work on in conflict and peace building, the religious dimension, my colleagues already get it. And it's already, if you have a Buddhist monk or a Catholic nun in the cafe line at USIP, that's pretty standard, nobody blinks. But we're a very small animal compared to the other US government agencies in the foreign policy realm. So State Department, USAID, Department of Defense, and so on. So our experience of it being mainstream there doesn't necessarily reflect the US government, our sister agencies. And there we've been a part of the process and the conversations that led in 1998 the establishment of the Religious Freedom Office at State Department, the inclusion of religious and cultural advisors at USAID, our development wing, the move towards using chaplains within the military as advisors and engagers with local religious leaders in theaters of operation like Iraq and Afghanistan, the establishment of the Religion and Global Affairs Office in the State Department in 2013, which Peter Mandaville has been a part of, the integration of greater religious understanding within Foreign Service Institute courses, both regional courses and a standalone course on religion and foreign policy there. So we've been a part of that. There's been two things that I think have contributed to some of the fits and starts. So one of them is just the recognition that a lot of the graduate schools that churn out the foreign service officers themselves have had a bit of a blinder in understanding religion. So I'm a product of one of those schools, the Fletcher School of Diplomacy at Tufts. When I was there was one half-credit course that was on Islamic finance. Otherwise, there were no courses that had to do with religion, so I was that annoying person who was constantly raising my hand to bring it up. But that's reflective of the academic discipline of international relations, the fact that international law, the international order, international relations derives out of Western European Enlightenment and its assumptions about religion and secularism. Religion, as Federica Mogherini was saying earlier, is something to be avoided because it's, of course, considered the feminized other, irrational, emotional, a threat to order, international order, much less the rational give and take of negotiations that lead to conflict resolution, versus the rational secularity that if lifted above religion is going to lead to peace, love, understanding, and justice, as we subsequently have seen across the world.
Yeah.
So based on some of those assumptions, a lot of those who are coming out of you haven't had a strong focus on religion in those graduate schools, and that has contributed to some of this lack of understanding and engagement within the diplomatic sphere. I think that's changed in large part because some of the work of foundations like the Luce Foundation, which have given a lot of support to ensure that academics are increasingly addressing those issues within those graduate schools, and that is in turn influencing then diplomacy. The second is our concern about the Establishment Clause within the US Constitution, so the legal separation of religion and state, as I said. And that has led to a lot of pauses on some of the integration of religion to ensure that we're abiding by both the principle and the law of ensuring that US government programs and funds aren't being used to advance particular interpretations of religion or to privilege particular religious ideas or actors or institutions. So that has meant sometimes that we've had to take a pause in order to ensure that the ways in which we're engaging with religion is not a government construction of religion in a way that would undermine the values of some of our founders. So I'll stop there.
Okay, Susan, I'll take the second question to you a bit later. Let me turn now to Merete. So Merete Bilde needs no introduction here, but she's a policy advisor at the European External Action Service, and importantly as well, co-chair of the Transatlantic Policy Network on Religion and Diplomacy. So Merete, the journey has been a long one, right? And you've sort of been central to a lot of the discussions, at least here in Brussels. I mean, you have been a force working on coexistence, understanding, engaging. And I have to say, once again, personally, it's been very, very important and crucial role you've played. Now, compliments out of the way. How does the EU approach, and I think you're one of the crafters of this religion and society exchange as well, how does that differ from what you've heard from Azza or what you've heard from Susan?
It differs. I think I would start by where Azza left off and said, whether you like it or not, at some point in time, religion comes and gets you. Yeah. And I think we, on the European side of the Atlantic, have been resistant longer. It's in our genes. We like that. But at some point in time, you ignore religion at your own peril. And that is maybe in particular true about diplomats who sit far away from the field and who don't have first-hand engagement with civil society practitioners, actors, faith-based or not. And that is why we started our journey, I would say 15 years ago. Not that religion was not there, we were just not ready to open the door and deal with it. And the reason why we started this was pretty much because we were forced to. It was a bottom-up approach as opposed to the US governmental approach, which has very much been a top-down, sort of a concept-driven. We realized that there were some issues that were sneaking up the political and diplomatic agenda that we needed to deal with. And sometimes we didn't want to recognize them for what they were, and we tried to downplay and said, that's not our field, we cannot do that, we will not do that. But in other times, they came to us as very stark policy dilemmas. Mm-hmm. One case in point was Brunei, when they introduced Sharia-based penal code. Do we or do we not continue negotiating a PCE? There was a real issue where we had to take a stand. And through this early engagement, which was, I would say, timid, and sort of followed the Nike concept. Don't ask for permission, just do it, because you need to do it, you need to figure this out, and you need to come up with some sound advice. We have now developed into something where we have our top managers' recognition, acknowledgement, and strong encouragement to increase our religious literacy, to not fall into the trap that Azza you described by standardizing religion, making it into something abstract that is not part of. We are humble by the very nature of the fact that our literacy is still very much in the developing state, and some of you will know how much we work inside the EAS and also with other institutions, DEFCO included, to raise our religious literacy, to make diplomats at all levels, also officials, better at navigating the world as is, and make sure that we don't have blind spots. There's no point in ignoring the fact that we live in an institution which in many ways is very French, so it's very difficult sometimes to say we need to stop up and think about this. But it's no good either replacing a secular blind spot with a Christian blind spot. You know, blind spots are blind spots. They're better not had. And this is why it's now 12, 13 years ago, we established with the French, the Austrians, and the Swedes, who at that time were most advanced in this thinking, a like-minded group for diplomats and officials to come together to share notes. And very soon we found out we were not like-minded at all, but we were open-minded. We needed to deal with these things. And for various reasons, this cooperation led and was very useful for a while, and then it stopped. But then we really hit the booster bottom with this network of diplomats where we included the US. We had first left them out because it was very close to 9/11 and there was a lot of things. We kept in the Canadians first. They're sort of like
cousins.
First
cousins.
They're like the Brits, though I think now the Brits may be going the American way. I don't quite know. But anyway, so we said, no, you know, we need to have US in. It coincided also with the US really ramping up the government, this Religion and Global Affairs Unit. But what we found was that it has been tremendously useful because by having this sort of forum where we both in meetings, but certainly in between meetings, can share practices, good and bad, experiences, plant seeds that can lead to this, do roundtables at the UN to give a voice and power to women of faith and sustainable development, which is something where Azza and I cooperated a little bit. This is the kind of thing where you have a laboratory where you can go in and ask me, and we know we don't agree. And I think it's very important here to not forget member states. So in our group we have a number of member states. And these member states, they vary in the way, I mean, there are very many different approaches, not one European approach as you would probably never expect, and I don't think that's the aim either. Many different approaches, many different accents. But what is common to us all is that religion is not a single issue question. It's not a pigeonhole thing, you know, now we've done religion, we can move on. But member states tend to sort of, either they do the sort of intercultural, interreligious, traditional work, and there's a cluster of that. Then you have those who do mostly crisis management, crisis transformation with religion. Human rights, SDGs are human rights. I mean, that kind of, how do we make sure that we tap into those who are delivering SDGs in the field? And when we look at Sub-Saharan Africa, Azza, you know the facts better than I, it would be ridiculous not to talk to them. And then you have those who are increasingly looking at the politics of religion, because whether we like it or not, religion is also being played by governments, and they're not afraid of playing us, as we've seen. But I think I'll stop it by there. There are many different approaches inside Europe on this, but we're working on literacy, we're making ourselves smarter diplomats, hopefully, and we're working across the Atlantic. And I think especially these days, it's very important that we continue working across the Atlantic.
Right. Thank you very much, Merete. So let me just give you an example of how the EU has sort of changed its approach to religion. About 4 years ago, you remember, Merete, we had a conversation at Friends of Europe, which is one of the key think tanks in Brussels, on Muslim democracies. And we had representatives, very high-level representatives from Indonesia, Tunisia, and Malaysia. And I was looking for an EU representative, someone to come on my panel. And there was extreme nervousness within the institutions when I sent my traditional email. And I started calling up and say, hey guys, you know, you talk a lot. Federica has just come back from Indonesia, in fact. And what's happening? You know, religion, Muslim democracies. I don't think we can actually send someone. And then I went to Merete and I said, Merete, this is ridiculous. I mean, you know, we're showing the diversity of Islam and that there are Muslim democracies, flawed as the European ones are. Somebody needs to be there. So Merete came. And, you know, that's the kind of sort of pioneering spirit that has helped us to become friends, but also that the institutions are evolving. And something like this was actually unthinkable, I would say, 4 years ago. But 2 points I do want to make. One is about Islam. And a number of people will say, when we talk about this, when you talk about religion in society, we're really going around, you know, beating around the bush. This is actually about Islam. So I want all three of you to come into this. And my second point would be, if there was more diversity, religious, cultural, ethnic, within your institutions, not the UN, of course, and less so in the US, but the EU institutions are still predominantly white. And we heard today from our Scottish friend how diverse Europe really is. And that diversity is not reflected in the EU institutions, including not in the European Parliament. And that is a negative for you when you try and engage with the rest of the world. Because if you had the sensitivities within your institutions, it would be a different policies. So those 2 points, please, all three of you, tackle those, and then I'll open the floor for a quick Q&A. Please, who wants to kick off? Yes, please, Azza.
Those who know me know that, of course, I will immediately would love to kick off on this one. Thank you very much for the questions. Just to pick up on a point that relates to this that Merete ended on, which is the nexus between the religious and the political. And that's the time we're living in now. And precisely because it's the nexus between the religious and the political that is spearheading so much of this interest in religion, that we therefore find that those who are in that public space, in those platforms, making the decisions, tend to come from a particular part of the world, i.e. largely European or North American, and from a particular religion, which is also not necessarily Islam at all. Therefore, the perception of the misperception of the bias inherent in this approach, that this is all about Islam, that can be reminiscent of la mission civilisatrice. Now we need to, improve the world from certain bugs that are infecting it. That perception is very, very endemic, and it is one of the taboos of this business of religion. We don't talk about this openly. We have it in private conversations in safe spaces that, don't you think this is a bit too much about Islam, all about Islam? The entire approach, the whole work in the European Union started with this worry about the cartoons and the Islam and terrorism and what have you. In the US, there's always that concern. Don't you think that that's a little bit of the driver here? And because a lot of the protagonists who are leading in this area of work themselves also actually don't come from diverse societies, but are also representative of their institutions that are leading it, it affirms that, I call it a misperception because I happen to be familiar with the people working in this field, but it is a misperception or a perception that definitely needs to be addressed. And it is not going to be addressed in the same way that we did in the 1970s when we were talking about women's empowerment and women's rights, and we said, well, we have a handful of women here, there, and everywhere. That's done. We're doing that. It's good. We're doing a similar thing now by getting a handful of Muslims or Asians or whatever and putting them in different places, saying, see, it's pretty representative. We're good. We've done that. Actually, no. It goes back to the point about a fundamental questioning of how and why we are doing this work. And yes, let's take the bull by the horns and address the fact that the overriding and dominant way of being perceived, and perhaps the rationale behind so much of this work, is national security, is concern about Islam as a rising threat. It is that. The more we try to pretend it's not, the less we will honor the whole business of doing this work in the first place. And that's why I keep talking about an encounter. It's not about empowerment. Empowerment is a language of the past. Somebody's having to empower somebody else who's presumably disempowered. And if we don't see it in that binary term, we have to then acknowledge that we're perhaps equals coming around the table. And that was precisely the principle that spurred in 2010 the UN system to begin a strategic learning exchange, where we convened the different policymakers, the different faith actors, and the point was, nobody knows it all, nobody has all the knowledge, and nobody's right. But we have plenty to learn from one another. And that's one of the ideas behind this kind of a platform, that you're not trying to empower anybody to be what? Better people? Better people of faith? Really? Or better without faith? No, but it's the encounter. And the encounter has to presume a level playing field. It has to be inclusive of the different religions. And it cannot be tokenistic or have this altruistic thing about everything's going to be wonderful just because we've got all of us around the table, but we might have some really hard issues to deal with. And the challenge is, how do we do that?
Thank you, Azza. Susan?
Yeah, I mean, like Azza, I would say we can't shy away from acknowledgement of the ways in which concern about Islam as a political force has driven some of this move towards understanding religion, and it's grounded in that assumption religion's a problem, and so we better think about it, engage with it, so that we can manage religion, pull out the good religion that we like, that affirms the human rights and the neoliberal order and so on. But at the same time, I think this is where the humility comes in as well. For those of us who come from the Christian faith, acknowledging the ways in which Christian extremism has in the past been a huge force for, in my own country, for slavery, for disempowering women, in the world at large, for colonialism and missionary work and so on. And Christian extremism is on the rise across the world. I work in Myanmar and Sri Lanka. Within Buddhism, you're seeing quite a bit of exclusionary forces that draw on Buddhist ideas, transnational forces, and so on. So again, that humility and recognizing, and perhaps actually starting with some of the ways in which our own religions and cultures that we come from, whether religious or racial, have advanced some of these exclusionary ideas and practices, allows us then to move away, to take advantage of the ways in which the focus on Islam has raised this question of religion and faith, but then expanded in a way that moves it beyond, further advancing this idea that one particular religion is the problem.
Okay, Merete.
I'm a little bit split on this because, of course, Islam is part of the reason why we do this. But I'm almost tempted to tell you the reasoning on the inside. And I see Lorenzo standing so far away, so he can't hit me now. But we had a debate inside the services as to the precise focus. Because, as Mogherini explained, this started in Indonesia. It started with her encountering a wide array of Muslims, activists, etc. And what she heard, not that she didn't know it, but it inspired her to go back and tell us, you folks, you keep holding out the microphones to those who speak of Islam in violent terms, who use Islam as a polarizing. And many of those happen to be in the Middle East, and some of them, you know, there are sort of ripple effects back and through to Europe, et cetera, et cetera. So what we were told was, it has to be about Islam, but not exclusively Islam, but you have to overfly the Middle East to connect to Europe, and then started this very interesting debate. And I shared with you, because I think it's useful for you to know, that we came down saying, no, this has to be about all religions that needs to be contextualized. We live in a society where faith matters. Faith lives together with non-faith. Azza is a believer, I'm not. We have concrete solutions or problems to solve in our everyday life that has nothing to do with faith, but where there is and can be a faith sort of injection into the solution. So we decided to say, okay, we will ask the Lokahi Foundation to help us figure out how we could do this best. Because the moment you say Islam, you say radicalization. You don't say Islam, civilization, and culture. You know, we are very binary in the way we have had let religion filter into our interests. It's either been Christianity, religious freedom, or Islam, radicalization. So we commissioned them to, in addition to do the research, the focus groups inside Europe, outside Europe, to come up with a report. And you actually have the report on your seats. The report on Islam and contextualized and pluralistic societies, which is a terrible title, but it's a code for understanding why is it we keep asking the wrong questions. And I would really, I mean, if our initiative today had stopped even there, I would have been happy, because it's the best baseline study I've seen on the topic. But we went further and said, this is not good enough. We also need to look at ourselves. Are we too pale and male? Are we too Christian? And what has Christianity become? I also hear political leaders, including Christian leaders, who talk to their own Christian colleagues and say, you claim to be Christian, what you are arguing, your rhetoric, your acts are so far from Christian doctrine. So I would not want to spin this kind of, we are obsessed with Islam, because of course we are obsessed with Islam. And we fear because we know precious little. If Mogherini can get into trouble for saying Islam belongs in Europe, Merkel says that, that shows you where we are. But it's not necessarily where the buck stops. And I think this is why when we take the time, and it took a long time, to carve this out and make sure that we bypass those who hang on to the microphones because they know Islam is this, and say, actually, we'd like one level lower. There's a majority, silent people at the grassroots level. We don't know them, but we would like to connect and see what and we learn from them. One of the things that we have been looking at is to see how could the exchange iterations feed into our policy. Because we tend to speak to government officials. We tend to speak to institutional religious representatives. And that's just not enough.
Okay, I'm going to take the microphone from you. No, I am, because you're making some very, very valid points. But we need to exchange with our participants as well. I was at a conference in Slovenia just on Monday on a panel with a former European foreign minister, a woman who still talked about Orientalism. And it just gives you an idea of how much work still needs to be done in our policy institutions in Europe before we understand what the new world is all about. Please, I'd like to, once again, you now know me as a moderator. I want to take quick questions. We have to end at 11:30, so let me first take a question from the lady over here. Yes, keep your hand up. Oh, stand up, yeah.
Oh, okay. Can I hold it for myself?
No, we've got a rule that
you have a rule?
The moderators, yeah. Thank you.
No agency for me, though? Okay.
No.
Thank you very much. My name is Germana Shetta. I come from OSCE ODIHR. I'm advisor for combating intolerance against Muslims there in Warsaw, covering 57 participating states of the OSCE. Very briefly, I will just offer a brief comment. Thank you very much for all of your contributions. I think they've been very, very useful and very thought-provoking. I would just like to say I work a lot with Muslim communities in Europe, minority communities, and everything you were talking about somehow resonates with me and with the communities and what I see and hear from the communities in terms of this feeling of civilization mission or a civilizatory mission coming our way, or modernizing attempts, quote unquote, governments having this idea of somehow structuring Islam or organizing Islam or telling Muslims what to do, etc., etc. And I wanted just to include some layers that are related to everything that you spoke about, which is the European history, which is also the entanglement of both race and class in this whole talk, and all of these things come down at Muslim minority communities, issues around the surveillance and national security as well, obviously. So these debates are very tough, and what I would like to say is it's really nice that we are here today, but when it comes to minority communities in Europe, it's not that we are on some zero, so to say, grounds. We are in a deep minus in terms of trust, in terms of, we are saying, okay, we now see on this side, we would like to connect more, but having or building the trust with these individuals and communities who would even like to connect, and how to connect, and on what terms, and how to make sure that this is around, yes, us being equal.
Thank you.
I'm
sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but I do need to take a couple of questions. But you made some very valid points that we need to absolutely address. Could you bring the microphone here, please, to Isma Jahan? Thank you. No, we don't give the microphone.
Okay, so that I don't keep it, right?
Okay. Exactly.
Thank you very much, Shada, and I'd also like to start by thanking for this very wonderful initiative of the EU. I'll come to that. I have a specific question for Merete, but before that, let me say, my name is Isma Jahan. I am representing the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to the European Union. And although the name Islamic is there, but it is more a political body of 57 member states covering 4 continents, including Europe. Having said so, I would also say that, you know, what we tend to see is in the world today is more of misuse of religion, and often the misperception, it could be a deliberate one by media and, if I might use right-wing populists, to demonize particular religion, in case I should say Islam, since we have been talking, to have some, promote some narrow interest. So they are just trying to whip up emotion. And this is, I think, what is fundamental for this global exchange to look at.
Yeah.
And I would think that it's not only for Islam, but as in any other part of the world, Susan has mentioned, in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, in India, where there are political religion.
Yeah.
So how, my question would be, coming to Merete, that when European countries, I think, if not all EU members, but most of them profess secularism in the true sense of separation of state and religion, but how do you venture to incorporate that in the EU foreign policy? Because I'm sure it is a difficult task. Thank you.
Thank you, Ismet. Please, sir, could you bring the microphone forward to the gentleman over here? Whatever works for you. As long as you're short and to the point, you can stand where you like.
I'm medium height. My name is Rabbi Alexander Goldberg. Some people call me that dreaded word of faith leader. I'm also a graduate of this Lokahi program that was spoken today. Briefly, I want to congratulate Azza on your new appointment in religion and peace, and I wish you well in your new job. I lead a team of 11 faith workers, I learned today, and also non-faith workers from 7 world beliefs and humanists at a university which is very international. And I'm wondering how you're going to empower people in the exchange program when we're leading it from a secularizing European continent, and we're trying to reach out to a world which is, faith is not lessening, it's growing. Faith populations are growing as a percentage and overall. And how do we bridge those gaps? And the other thing I would ask you, how do we bridge, and this is my final question, is it's not just about NGOs, and I've dealt with governments, and especially the UK government, for years. I used to be, should I say this? I used to be head of the Faith Forum for London under Mayor Boris Johnson and had monthly meetings with him. Yeah.
Fine. Thank you for that disclosure.
I solved that one. But how do you solve the issue, and I think Merete mentioned it, about religious literacy in governments? In European governments, they are very secular. So how do we have the exchange program which involves civil servants, which involves politicians, as well as NGO leaders? I guess that's my question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to take one more question, because I'd like to turn back to the panel. The question continues later on. So let me take the lady over there, please. Don't be so frustrated. There's another panel session and then 4 workshops in the afternoon. You get your say.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Annie Zonneveld. I'm the founder and president of Muslims for Progressive Values and a founding member of Alliance of Inclusive Muslims. My question is, it's not quite clear to me how the exchange is actually supposed to work. So maybe some clarification on that, please.
Thank you. Very, very good. So let's walk backwards. Merete, let me give you the floor first.
Thank you. Sorry.
We're among friends here.
Yeah. First of all, to say when we focus on the good stories, it's not because we want, like an ostrich, to put our heads in the sand and to belittle or take attention away from the very serious questions there are regarding minorities across the globe. Minorities in Europe, in the Middle East, China, wherever. US, thank you for adding. So please don't see this as that. As the High Representative said, this is a program that we are launching because we see a space where we can get in and maybe being humble, patient, and giving it the right sort of seed money, nurturing, et cetera, help create a different tone to the global narrative, which is religion spells trouble and religion should be eradicated. And I don't know, there's a lot of questions being asked about the secular Europe. Europe is many things. I mean, I come from a country, Denmark, where there's no distinction between state and church, high degree of post-Christians, or I don't know which term to use. To say that we are secular, I think would be, I don't think it does justice to the complexity. And I know there are people in the audience who could speak to this much, much better than I. But also it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we sit in an institution which is not religious. We cannot afford and should not make an apology of being people who stick to our mandate. We have policy objectives and we do engage to promote those. That's also why we don't do this because we want to engage, we want to increase the role of religion or increase the religious potency of our policies. We do it because we think we need to, because we realize that we will be smarter, we will be more relevant if we do so. For governments, and that also means that for government officials, you can increase, Alex, religious literacy and sensitivity without changing the rules of the game. I would not for once, though I'm very committed to this work, suggest that we become more religious within the EU. As you will remember, we had some talk at some point in time whether there should be a reference to God in the treaties. We know how that ended. Those who couldn't agree were not the Muslims, it was the Christians among themselves, so we ended up with something called the Article 17, apologies, Vincent and Fergus, the Article 17 dialogue, where we consult faith-based and non-faith-based actors on EU policy. So I think we need also to be a little bit stringent with ourselves when we use these big terms. We are just foreign policy practitioners, and trust me, we live in a world where things go fast, we need to have answers to things, and we try to make ourselves as relevant as we can, and part of doing that is we try to learn our homework, and we do that by tapping into the amazing work that Azza has been doing. I mean, some of what we are doing is baby steps compared to what she has achieved. Some of the good experiences that we do see from across the Atlantic, but also in member states. I mean, we are learning by standing shoulder to shoulder, and this is where this network that we have created and has now flourished. It has a terrible acronym, TIPNERD, but if you were to Google it, you'll see we have a website, and all our policy documents, all our handbooks, all our stuff is now out there because we want to make it usable to a broader public. And if I may, just one last thing, Azza, Shada, is one thing is what we think up here, and sometimes, you know, when you sit in headquarters, it feels like you are 30,000 feet above what's happening in Bosnia. You need to have people on the ground who understands and can help decipher and see the opportunities, etc. And this is where what we do is not just policy work here, it's really also connecting to our people on the ground and make sure that when we hire people, especially in delegations, we don't hire people who look and sound like ourselves, that we go that extra mile to get some local staff that can help us decipher the world as it is. And I think, yes, we have a problem in the Brussels bubble, but we also have a problem elsewhere. But I think by just already now asking the questions that I see in some national services, including my own, there has been quite a learning curve, and I think that's good to notice.
Good. Live and learn is very good. So Susan, please.
Yeah, a couple of things. Are these basically our final remarks as well?
Yes,
am I guessing? Okay.
Absolutely.
So a couple things. One, in response to the question from my sister from the OSCE, I have a similar concern about government construction of religion. I think that came out in my earlier remarks. Whenever governments start talking about engaging religion, I'm naturally a little suspect. Because what are they trying to do here, and what are the power differentials, and what are the assumptions, and what are the agendas at play, and to what degree is instrumentalism versus partnership, and et cetera, and humility playing a role or not. This is where I think actually some of the legal questions, sometimes people call them barriers, but the legal questions that are put forward by the Establishment Clause of the US Constitution has been helpful in the US context, because we need to constantly ask that question for legal purposes of, is US government funding, programming, all the power of the US government being used in order to advance a particular religious interpretation, a religious community, a religious agenda? And if so, that's a problem. Then that goes against our principles. Not to say it doesn't happen sometimes, but we have that constant check on it. And I think that's perhaps useful just as a principle as governments and multilateral institutions and so on begin to engage in that space, is to constantly have that kind of a legal or a principled check on how they're engaging with religious communities to ensure that they're not attempting to construct religion itself. Secondly, in terms of religious literacy, what's often talked about with religious literacy for diplomats is not necessarily the, what's the difference between Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism and Vajrayana Buddhism or this and that, but it's more just about being sensitive to religion as a dimension of society and politics, and how do we attend to that, recognizing that it's incredibly complex as a dimension of human life and social life and political life. And the extent to which that form of literacy, which actually Merete's program within the EU has a strong focus on religious literacy in that sense, rather than Islam 101 or Christianity 101. I think that's more useful. We can engage with religious scholars in particular settings as we seek to understand in a particular setting how to engage within the religious space and advance within the religious space. We also do, at USIP, we do something, we have an initiative that's called the mapping of the religious landscape in conflict-affected states, that just for the purpose of individual embassies or practitioners in settings like Libya or South Sudan or Myanmar, they have a sense, Iraq, they have a sense of some of the complexities that exist between religious traditions, within religious traditions, the relationship between religion and the state, and so on, so they can begin to navigate it. So those kinds of tools, I think, can be helpful for trying to understand a little bit more about the substance of religion or the particularities of religion as it manifests in a particular setting, without trying to create broad brushstrokes, which can be very dangerous when diplomats or anyone thinks that they truly understand the nature of any particular religious tradition.
And now very quickly, your final point?
My final point would be what I think is potentially powerful about this exchange platform is, as I mentioned in talking about Sri Lanka and Myanmar, some of the movements there, whether you think of them as religious or political, I think that's a false dichotomy, but in a modern dichotomy, but they're transnational. And a lot of these forces are transnational, right? And so the idea of also creating transnational platforms and networks that can take advantage of media, of different tools of globalization in order to link themselves, these activists and these movements transnationally in order to address, you're never gonna get rid of political instrumentalization of religion. That's as old as humans, and it's going to exist forever. But can we ensure that those who are seeking to create resilience within communities to instrumentalization by political actors who are using religion in order to push back against some of those trends and those practices? That's where I think these kinds of exchanges that can link folks and can help them strategize with each other and create the tools can be especially powerful.
Thank you very much. Transnational connections are very important, not just in the negative sense of Steve Bannon and Geert Wilders, but also to get the good people, the constructive people, talking to each other. Thank you very much. Azza.
3 very quick points. First of all, does anybody know what Shada Islam would actually mean? It means the inspiration, the movement, the energetic beauty of Islam. Just FYI.
So it's great that we're being moderated by that. Thank you.
Okay.
And you live up to it beautifully. I would say, having said that, that I'm very happy to hear that somebody still remembers Orientalism, because I think much of what we're talking about today can hearken to very Orientalist attitudes, actually. So it's always a good idea to keep that in our consciousness as we approach so much of this work. And certainly, as this platform has evolved, there's been a deliberate sensibility and sensitization against appearing to be Orientalist in any way, shape, or form, and that will have to continue to instruct it. Very big vote of thanks for our colleague from the OSCE who mentioned the deep minus, but also mentioned something which never gets talked about when we talk about religion, which is race and class. And it's as if we've forgotten that race and class very much still exist, permeate, and underline a great number of the issues that we're talking about, because we're much more comfortable now having categorized religion. Now that we've seen it, we talk about religion as though it is devoured of the very old ways of being able to strategize and look at one another and actually stratify society. So thank you for bringing that point up. It very much is the case. So think religion, race, class, ethnicity, gender, think of the intersectionalities, and don't just think religion. And last but by no means least, the point about, what would it be like if we were suddenly to consider developing programs for political literacy of religious actors? How would y'all feel about that? We need to do political literacy for religious actors. I'm glad that some of you said yes. I happen to be on the bank that says really no, because we've got plenty of political involvement already by religious actors who believe themselves perfectly well situated and positioned indeed to be political actors. Those of us who have been in this journey for the last 30 years would say it's a very fine idea to be sensitive to one another's spaces. It is also equally fine to be sensitive to the differences between these different spaces, such that we're not talking a total overlap between the religious and the political along the lines that Susie has very eloquently articulated. What we need to be doing in a platform like this, which I believe has to be the underlying context, is it's very unfortunate that we've discovered religion at around the same time that we are hitting multilateralism left, right, and center. And it is as if the universal values that brought us together after the Second World War no longer matter, but we are very focused on religion. Very bad idea, in my humble opinion. Might be a good idea to see how this focus on religion is intersectional to the other issues like race, class, ethnicity, gender, you name it, but is also foundational to an ability to be able to see how can we revive multilateralism and human rights as we understood them. And if we don't do it that way, we will be hurting everybody but making a big fuss about religion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all three of you for some very, very powerful remarks on religion and the connection with foreign policy. Let me give you just one little anecdote. Right after 9/11, I was a journalist, and the European Union sent three very important men: Javier Solana, who was the EU High Representative in those times, Chris Patten, who was the European Commissioner, and Louis Michel, who was the Belgian Foreign Minister. It was the Belgian presidency of the EU. And these three men, along with 20 journalists, and I was privileged to be part of that coterie, we went to 6 countries, Muslim countries. Post 9/11, European Union wanted to send a very strong message that the war on terror was not what Europe was about. That was the American narrative. That was not the European narrative. And we went from capital to capital. I won't mention all of them, but very important Islamic countries. And the message that Europe sent at that point was so crucial to try and ease the tensions that were building up at that moment between the Muslim world and the West. And I'll always remember that Chris Patten, when he was in Cairo, he was asked at a press conference very, very powerful questions from there about, this war on terror, this crusade against Islam, the terms that had been used by the American president of the time. And his response was so powerful. I mean, this man is still a powerful force. And he said, just remember, the Holocaust was not invented by the Muslim world. So, and he harked back to the racism that has existed often in Europe. And I think that quietened the minds of many people and made us very aware that Europe has a different story to tell and can make it a much more powerful story if we engage in the kinds of initiatives that I'm very happy to see here today. So join me in thanking our panelists. And just some housekeeping. Coffee now, we deserve it. You guys deserve it. And please be back at 12 o'clock because we have a final panel and then some closing remarks from EU officials. Thank you very much.
To bring Muslims closer to non-Muslims. We try to stimulate Muslim families not only to share with the closest friends, is to share with the whole country. We all have this a way of let's connect with a stranger away from us, but not with a stranger closer to my door. And that's where I felt that Ramadan festival at the time filled a huge gap in the country. Be proud of who you are. Be proud if you are Muslim or Christian or atheist, anything you are. There's something uniting us. We all are Amsterdamers. Go learn, get inspired, but at the same time, move into action.
This church is an open and welcoming space for everyone of any background. Doesn't matter what religion you are, gender, identity, culture, language, everyone is welcome here. I'm the Reverend Bonnie Evans-Hills, and I'm a priest in the Church of England, but I also do some work with the UN Office for Genocide Prevention. So this is a welcome church. So it's not just about refugees, and it's not just about the poor, it's about people who are on the edge in all kinds of ways. This is a safe space for them. Liverpool is a port city, so people have been coming in from all over the world into this city, in and out again, for centuries. Coexistence is very much a multicultural part of Liverpool. The cafe, you see all different people from all different backgrounds coming together. I've been working in interreligious dialogue for a very long time, and it's that neighborhood, community, one-on-one relationship building that does the most good. People are able to listen to one another, become close to one another, learn their stories, and have respect and regard for one another, to look after each other from a humanitarian perspective rather than one of fear. We developed personal relationships. Yes, we talked over serious issues, but we also shared something of our own personal concerns as well. We got to know one another as people. This church is an open and welcoming space for everyone of any background. Doesn't matter what religion you are, gender, identity, culture, language, everyone is welcome here. I'm the Reverend Bonnie Evans-Hills, and I'm a priest in the Church of England, but I also do some work with the UN Office for Genocide Prevention. So this is a welcome church. So it's not just about refugees, and it's not just about the poor, it's about people who are on the edge in all kinds of ways. This is a safe space for them. Liverpool is a port city, so people have been coming in from all over the world into this city, in and out again, for centuries. Coexistence is very much a multicultural part of Liverpool. The cafe, you see all different people from all different backgrounds coming together. I've been working in interreligious dialogue for a very long time, and it's that neighborhood, community, one-on-one relationship building that does the most good. People are able to listen to one another, become close to one another, learn their stories, and have respect and regard for one another, to look after each other from a humanitarian perspective rather than one of fear. we developed personal relationships. Yes, we talked over serious issues, but we also shared something of our own personal concerns as well. We got to know one another as people.